Hi everyone, it's Leela from Miss Kiss Creations. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video, I'm going to show you how to create a Christmas or holiday themed Milky Way tumbler. I will be going through the materials that I'll be using for this tumbler in this video, and I'll also have a full complete list of materials that I'll be using in this video, and I'll be adding coupon codes and links of where I purchase all my materials. Today, I will be working with a 20-ounce stainless steel tumbler. I did purchase this tumbler from Maker Flow Crafts. I will have their link in my description below. And as for the glitters, all of my glitters in this video is going to be from Glitter Heart Company. I will have a coupon code in my description below to receive 15% off your first order from Glitter Heart Company. So like I said, I have my 20-ounce stainless steel tumbler. This tumbler came silver stainless steel. So what I did was I sanded it down with 180 grit sanding block, and then I wiped it down with 91% alcohol. You can also use 99% alcohol as long as it is 91% or higher. And after I wiped it down with 91% alcohol, I went ahead and I spray painted this tumbler with a flat or matte white spray paint. And then I let it dry for about 20 to 30 minutes. And then now I'm ready to add the glitter on my tumbler. I will be adding my glitter to my tumbler using the epoxy method. The epoxy that I use is Illuminate Amazing Clear Cast. I will be posting their link in my description below. The amount of epoxy that I'll be using is going to be very, very little. So whenever I do my glitter tumblers, I try to do them after I've already epoxied another tumbler. So I typically use my leftover or my excess epoxy that I may have. So the amount of epoxy that I use for this 20 ounce is going to be about 4 milliliters of epoxy. So that is about 2 milliliters of part A and 2 milliliters of part B. You want a very tiny amount of epoxy on your tumbler because you want your epoxy to act as an adhesive. You don't want to drown your glitter with your epoxy. One, it's going to dry a lot slower than it should. And two, you're not going to have that nice sparkle on your epoxy with your glitter. So for instance, if you've ever done an epoxy glitter tumbler where you lay your epoxy down and then you lay your glitter down, if you added way too much, you're going to see that glitter not have a shine, or if there's spots in your tumbler where the glitter doesn't have a shine, that's the spots where you added too much epoxy. So it's very, very important for you to add a very thin layer of epoxy and make sure that layer is very even. So I went ahead and I mixed my epoxy off camera. If you do want to know how to mix your epoxy properly, I will be posting a video in my description below for all of my beginner tumbler creators. I'm adding my epoxy to my tumbler. Again, this epoxy is going to act as an adhesive. It's not going to act as a layer to make it shiny. This is just so the glitter can stick to this tumbler. So what I do is I dip my gloved finger or my gloved hand into my cup with epoxy, and then I layer it on, or I add it onto my tumbler like so. I know a lot of people like to pour their epoxy on their tumbler and then wipe off the excess. I don't like to do that because I tend to pour too much, and that way sometimes whenever I was a beginner, I poured too much and then I added my glitter and I had way too much epoxy on my tumbler. So I like to just take my time with this. I dip my gloved finger inside of my tumbler and then I add my epoxy all around my tumbler. And a good way that I like to reference this with, especially my beginner tumbler creators, is if you've ever sprayed your adhesive on your tumbler and then added glitter, if you notice the little amount of spray that goes on your tumbler is very, very thin, and your glitter still sticks to that spray adhesive. So that's what I like to think of when I'm adding this liquid epoxy on the tumbler, is I want this adhesive to be so thin, just as thin as whenever I used to spray adhesive, the adhesive on for my glitter to stick. So you want it to be really, really thin, and you want to just take your time with this because if you don't have a spot, if you have a spot on your tumbler that doesn't have epoxy on it, then the glitter won't stick to that area. And I've done that so many times if I'm in a rush. So I like to really take my time with this and go around the tumbler multiple times like I'm doing, like you see here, and just make sure that I hit this tumbler with all of this epoxy. And this is sometimes hard whenever you're working with a white tumbler because you can't really see where you've placed your epoxy. So make sure you're just doing this very carefully and you're just taking your time. And you want to make sure you're hitting the bottom. And what I do is I just take, again, I dip my finger inside of my epoxy and I just take my finger and I just roll it on the bottom. And I'm just making sure I'm hitting every single spot of the bottom. And I just want to fully cover tumbler. And if you have like a light over you, you can kind of look at your tumbler from different angles. This helps you maybe see if you've missed any spots. So whatever works for you, go ahead and do that. And I'm going to finish applying this epoxy on my tumbler and then I will return. Hey guys, I'm back with my tumbler and I have my epoxy on my tumbler, and you can see how little of epoxy I use on my tumbler. I probably have another 3 or 4 tumblers I can do with the glitter method, epoxy glitter method. So I just want to show you how much I have left over. I did not use that much. So now that I have my epoxy on my tumbler, I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but I can clearly see streaks on my tumbler. The way that I got the streaks is because I have such little amount on that tumbler that I drag and I pull it, so it creates kind of lines or streaks. So what I like to do is I hit this with a heat gun. The reason why I hit this with a heat gun is because it flattens out the tumbler, or it smooths out the tumbler, so you're not going to see all the streaks or the lines. Because whenever you place this glitter on this tumbler, if there's a line, like an indentation or a line, you're going to see that line through the glitter. So you're going to have a nice pretty coat of glitter and you're going to see a line or a streak. So I like to hit it with a heat gun. Once I hit it with the heat gun, it smooths right out. The heat gun that I use is a Wagner brand. I did purchase this from Lowe's. I know you can purchase this from Amazon as well. I use the high setting on this. It has 2 settings, and I just hit it for about 5 to 10 seconds. I hold the heat about 5 to 6 inches away from the tumbler. So once I've hit my tumbler with my heat, this is going to allow the epoxy to kind of thin. So I take my hand again and I kind of rub it against or on the tumbler, and this gets rid of the streaks a lot easier instead of applying all that heat. So you can see that, well, I know I can see that the streaks are coming out of the tumbler because it really thinned that epoxy out. All right, now for my next step is going to be applying the glitter to my tumbler, and I'm going to be using the crushed candy canes, the Very Merry, and then the frosted ice. The Winter Wonderland I'm going to add later, and this is an optional add for y'all if you want to add this. So I'm just going to start with the crushed candy canes. You don't have to start with anything specific, whichever one you grab first. And I'm just going to apply it kind of in a diagonal way. So what I like to do, I'm going to stand up to make it a little easier. I move the tumbler towards me, so the tumbler is going towards me, and then I add the glitter from the bottom and then up. And I am not really doing this in any specific way, meaning if it gets messy, then it gets messy. I'm just making a diagonal line, and where it lands is where it lands. And I also have a catch paper on the bottom. So I take that catch paper and then I just fill my container back up, and then I move on with the next color. My next color is going to be the frosted ice, and I'm just going to lay this right next to the crushed candy canes. And I'm going in that same diagonal line, and I'm just letting the excess fall, and then I kind of pat on the tumbler. And I'm using a different paper, a different catch paper, every color that I use, so I don't mix my glitters. And if you see any spots where you might have missed, just go back through it. Just let the tumbler spin. Don't try to chase your tumbler, just let it spin around, and then you can get the rest on the next round. I have my Very Merry. I'm going to start from the top, and then I'm just going to line it up next to the frosted ice. So I'm going to let the tumbler spin. I'm not going to chase the tumbler, and then I'm just going to dump that glitter right next to that frosted ice. And I'm filling in any spots where I see is blank there. So if I missed any spots, meaning if I see any white spray paint sticking up, I'm just going to add some. And then I'm going to pat on the tumbler, and that's going to get rid of the excess from the Very Merry. So back to my original color, which is the crushed candy canes. I'm going to add it next to the Very Merry, which was that red and green color that I added. And then I'm just going to make that diagonal line. So I'm just flowing with the tumbler. And for these Milky Ways, I really like to add chunky mix. If you want to add the fine glitter, that's fine, but I think the Milky Ways really pop whenever you have a chunky mix. That's why I chose all of these mixes, and I think it's perfect for the holidays. And instead of doing the frosted ice, I'm going to come in with the Very Merry, so it's going to be that green and red, so that's going to be my next color again. And for these Milky Ways as well, you don't have to use only 3 colors. You can use 6, 7, 8, or 10 colors if you like. So I just wanted these 3 because I thought these 3 was just enough to scream Christmas and holidays. So I think these three colors really go well together. Now for the frosted ice, I'm going to place it right next to the Very Merry, which is the green and red mix. And you see I need to come back around and add some more because I missed some spots there, which is fine. And again, I am using 3 separate catch papers, especially for this frosted ice, because I don't want any other colors inside this pretty white color, so you can really see if you mix any colors with this. All right, I'm gonna come in with my Very Merry again, and I'm going to start. I'm gonna actually spin it this way because I want to start on the bottom and then go up. The reason being is because there's a smaller bottom, so I can go up, and I'm going to hug that frosted ice. So I'm gonna hug that white glitter there and let it fall. And then you see I still have some left over. I still have a white spot. I have that spray paint left over. I'm going to add the frosted ice one more time. Now you can see that it's not going to flow all the way down. That's fine. That's one of the great things about these Milky Way tumblers. You don't have to have these lines super even. You don't have to have them going a certain like a width, I should say. Like some of mine are thicker than others. That's fine. So I'm going to add the white wherever I see that white spray paint. So all the space that I don't have already glittered is where that white's gonna go. Just like that. And then what I do is I kind of go around the tumbler and I see any spots that are kind of missing. You see I have a lot of glitter down here, which is what that is. And it's kind of the mix of all 3. So I kind of just put that in spots of where I may see any spots missing. And of course, we're not going to forget about the bottom. So what I do is I kind of tap all 3 colors onto a catch paper. I mix the colors with my hands or however you want to do it. I turn off my cup turner, and then I take the arm out of the turner and I kind of tap off the excess, and then I just smush down the tumbler to all that glitter, and I'm just picking it up. And the bottom kind of gets its own little festive design. I don't keep with the flow. I just like to mix all of them, and then you see on the bottom how that looks. It's just a big throw up of all of the colors. I really like that. So you can make your bottom whichever way. You can do it with one color. You can do it the way that I'm doing it. I know with a lot of these tumblers that are kind of curved in the middle, you see what I'm doing? I'm picking up the paper and I'm kind of pushing my fingers onto the bottom, and that allows the glitter to stick to the bottom a lot easier than just smushing it, because all the bottom's not going to touch that paper. You have to take your fingers and smush into the bottom. Turn on my cup turner again, and now we have this beautiful tumbler so far. It's not even finished, and we have this giant mess. So this next step is very important. I would say this is the most important part of this tumbler, especially to me, because if you don't do this step, then you're gonna have a lot of sanding. And I don't like to sand. I try to avoid sanding at all costs because I really don't like it. It's a pain in the butt, and I really think it could be avoided if you just take the proper steps. If you don't want to use gloves, it's totally up to you, but do keep in mind that there is wet epoxy on this tumbler, and you will get it on your fingers. So I first take a finger, whichever finger I want, and I put it along the rim of the tumbler, and I press down. This is kind of making the tumbler even, the rim even. So this is going to help you in the end so you don't have to sand that rim off. So I'm just pushing it down and I'm kind of making the glitter flush with the rim. So you don't want any glitter peeking over the rim, because then you're gonna have to have, it's just gonna be aggravating, or you're gonna have to sand it. So once that's done, I now go around the tumbler. You can turn off your turner, or you can leave it on the turner, whichever one you like. You can leave it on, because there's such a small amount of epoxy on here that the epoxy is not going to run. If your epoxy starts running, then you've added too much epoxy. So I'm going around the tumbler and I'm pressing down. And while I'm pressing, I'm kind of smushing down too. I'm pressing down firmly because I'm pushing down all of this chunky glitter onto the tumbler. So whenever I go to epoxy this glitter, it's going to be a smooth surface, or a more smooth surface than if I didn't do this. So if I didn't do this, you can see, let me take this off for y'all. You can see that chunky glitter. You can see how chunky that is and how everything's standing up on that tumbler. Once you epoxy that, that's all gonna stand up, and you're gonna have a lot of sanding to do. So to avoid this, what I do is I just press down firmly on the tumbler, and I really take my time with this step, just like how I told y'all to take your time with applying that epoxy. Because if you take this time with these small steps, at the end, you're gonna have a very, very beautiful finished product. So what you're gonna do is you're just gonna go around, and you can see I'm just taking my finger. There's gonna be some glitter that falls off, that's fine. And I'm just pressing down. So you can go with the stripes, or you can just press down around the tumbler, whichever way. Do not worry about your glitters mixing, that's fine. This is a Milky Way tumbler. You're gonna have glitters mix. And if you notice a lot of chunky glitter in like one spot, like it's kind of bunched up, because a lot of times the chunky glitter in general, it sticks together and it kind of makes like a ball of glitter. It's really pretty, but whenever you're going to epoxy it, it's gonna kind of stick up. You're gonna have a lot of bumps on your tumbler. Kind of smush around, or you can even fan off some. If there's too much glitter in one spot, you could see layers and layers of glitter kind of piled in one spot. Just fan it off some, move around that glitter, really stick it to that tumbler, and make that surface as smooth as you can. So I'm going to finish up this step, and then I will go ahead and return, and I'll let y'all know the next step. I'm back with my tumbler, and I'm done blotting or pressing down the glitter. So now that I'm finished with my tumbler and I'm happy with it, I just want to let y'all know that you are going to see some glitters stick up and poke through. That's fine. It's not going to be perfect, but you're going to have the majority pressed down firmly on the tumbler. So once I have that majority pressed down on the tumbler, I'm then going to turn on my cup turner, and I'm going to let this spin for a couple hours. So I'm gonna let this spin for about 2 hours, and then I'm going to turn off my cup turner, and then I'm going to let it air dry or air cure for about 2 to 3 hours. So after about 5 hours, I'm then going to move on to the next step. So like I said, I'm gonna allow this to spin on the turner for about 2 hours. I'm then going to turn off my cup turner, and I'm going to let it air dry or air cure for another 2 to 3 hours for the total drying or curing time of 5 hours. After 5 hours, I will see y'all for the next step. Hey guys, I'm back with my tumbler. I have it here. My cup turner is turned off, and it's been air curing for about 5 hours now. My epoxy underneath my glitter is completely dried, so it's not sticky at all. And if you can notice, a lot of the glitter has been pushed down, so there's not a lot of glitter sticking up. There are some pieces that are sticking up. That's okay. We can always adjust that here soon. So I just want to show y'all, for the most part, this tumbler is pretty flat. Again, there are some sticking up, but that's fine. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a layer of epoxy over this tumbler. I'm just going to add epoxy. I'm not going to go in with a design yet. And then as I'm adding this epoxy, what I do is I kind of go around the tumbler, and like I said, I really don't like sanding. So I just start kind of pushing off any excess glitter that may have not have stuck to the epoxy. So I'm not pressing down hard because I don't want to rip up any glitter, but any of the little tiny like stragglers, I should say, it will fall off easily. And this avoids sanding in the future. And then I make sure to take my gloved finger again, and I kind of clean up that rim again. I did mix my epoxy off camera. I mixed 20 milliliters of epoxy. So that's 10 milliliters of part A and 10 milliliters of part B, totaling 20 milliliters of epoxy. I mixed a little bit of epoxy because the reason for this layer is just to seal this epoxy in. So this layer isn't to be the finishing layer. You're going to put another layer of epoxy. So you want this layer to be thinner than thicker. So what I do is I just put this anywhere on the tumbler. There's no rhyme or reason how I do this. I place this epoxy anywhere around the tumbler in any direction, because this is a Milky Way tumbler, and one of the reasons why I like these tumblers is it's really hard to mess them up. And if the glitter is mixed together, then it's okay because it's supposed to be mixed. When I'm finished applying my epoxy, I'm going to let my tumbler spin on the cup turner for about 5 to 6 hours, and then turn off the cup turner and let it air dry or air cure for another 6 hours. So I'm going to let this dry for about 12-15 hours max, and then we'll move on to the next step. Hey guys, I'm back with my tumbler, and it is completely dried. I have let it sit for it's been about 18 to 20 hours. It did dry well before then. So if you see, my tumbler is really smooth for the amount of chunky glitter that I have on here. I don't know if the camera will pick it up as well as I'm seeing it in person, but it is really smooth. I still have to sand this down, but not as much as I would have if I didn't press down my glitter. So I'm still going to do some light sanding, and when I mean light, I mean very light, because you have a thin layer of epoxy over this glitter. So if you sand this tumbler right now with like hard sanding with like 180 grit sanding block, then you're going to sand the glitter off. So you don't want to sand the glitter off. You want to focus on sanding it very lightly with a higher grit sanding block or paper. So I'm using 220 grit sanding block. You can also use 320, and you can also use sandpaper. I am going to sand this tumbler down very lightly, and I'm going to focus on the spots that are obviously poking up and not flat. Now that my tumbler is sanded, what I do is I now wipe it down with 91% alcohol. And the reason why I do this is just to get any oils I may have transferred on the tumbler from my hands. Whenever you have a lot of oils on the tumbler and you add epoxy over it, epoxy tends to fisheye, so it doesn't grab the tumbler and stick on the tumbler the way that you may need it to. So that's what I do. You don't have to do this step, but I like to do this just to avoid any problems I may have whenever I apply my epoxy. All right, so I have my tumbler wiped down with 91% alcohol, and the next step is going to be adding the epoxy and my white swirl. So the way that I add my white swirl is just apple barrel acrylic paint. It is matte acrylic paint. I did purchase this from Walmart. This is about 50 cents or maybe $1 a container. It is really inexpensive, and it works really well with these tumblers. I mixed a total amount of 30 milliliters of epoxy. So I mixed 15 milliliters of part A and 15 milliliters of part B, totaling 30 milliliters of epoxy. So I separated the epoxy just to show y'all for this video. You don't have to separate it, but I just want to kind of break it down for y'all. So I have 20 milliliters of epoxy total mixed inside of my Dixie cup, and then I have 10 mLs of epoxy mixed inside of this small clear cup. So the 20 mLs of epoxy is going to go on my tumbler, and then I'm going to add white acrylic paint to the 10 mLs of epoxy, and that's going to be the design. So if you are a little confused, that's okay, because I know a lot of people, it's better to show them than just to explain it. So my first step is going to be adding my 20 milliliters of epoxy on my tumbler. So I'm going to add that now, and it's just clear epoxy. I just mixed it. So I did not add any paint to this. So I just need epoxy on this tumbler, just so I have a nice wet base on this tumbler. So I'm gonna add it all around, and I'm also going to hit the bottom with it. And you're gonna have a kind of a thicker coat. You don't really need like a thick coat, because we're gonna add some heat on this here in a second. But you want it to be thicker. So the reason why I harped so much on the thinner coat to seal the epoxy, or excuse me, the thinner coat to seal the glitter and a thinner coat underneath the glitter, one of the reasons is because this coat is going to be so thick or thicker that that you can add this thick coat without having the tumbler look really thick. So that's one of the reasons why it's important to keep those first two epoxy coats very thin, so I'm able to add this thick coat. So I'm almost done adding the 20 mLs of epoxy. And if you're not used to doing this type of design, you're gonna feel a lot of epoxy on this tumbler. That's what you want to feel. You want to feel that thicker coat, because you need this thick coat, because we need those inks, those paints to move around. So keep adding until you are done with this 20 mLs of epoxy. If you feel like you may have added too much epoxy on that second layer of epoxy, whenever you sealed that glitter in, then maybe add about 15, 16 mLs of epoxy instead of the 20 if you think you added too much. But I'm sure you'll be fine, and I'm sure the 20 mLs would be perfect for y'all. So I have finished adding all the epoxy, and I'm just adding the little bit I have left. And I'm going to take off my gloves, and I'm going to hit my epoxy with some heat. I want the epoxy to start moving around. Once I have my acrylic paint in my cup, I'm going to take a wooden stick, and then I'm going to stir the paints. And I added very little amount of paint. If you saw, I added maybe 2 or 3 drops, because you want to add less than more, because you can always add more. So I'd rather have too little paint than more. So you see, that much paint made that consistency. So whenever you are using a lighter color paint, sometimes you do have to use more. So white is lighter, so sometimes I might add just a little bit more. And the way that I know is whenever it's not transparent. So it's still a little transparent, you can still see through that white. So I'm going to add a little bit more. And the way that you know that you've added too much is it gets really sticky very easily. You will know whenever you've added too much paint to your epoxy. And if you did add too much, if you have some leftover epoxy, add more epoxy to the batch, and then it will equal right out. So this seems good. It looks like it's not transparent anymore. So I have a nice consistency of my paint and my epoxy. Now that I have enough consistency, I'm just going to hit my tumbler with my heat just one more time. I just want to make sure I have this heated up. You don't want to burn your epoxy, but you want a good layer, a thick layer on your tumbler, and you want it to be warm, because whenever it's warm, the epoxy moves around more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my epoxy with my paint, and then I'm going to just make lines. So I'm going to start from the bottom and just make kind of just a swirl line or a diagonal line on my tumbler. And I'm only going to be adding white to this tumbler because I want kind of the Christmas snowy holiday look. But if you want to add some greens and some white paints to this, go ahead and add some. It would be the same exact way, except for you'll make a little bit more epoxy, and then you'll just separate 3 colors instead of having 1 color. So I would go in with my red after my white, and then my green after my red and white, and then just keep going back and forth. So I'm going to add some on the edge here, and me adding some on the edge, it falls down to the bottom, and that just kind of designs the bottom there. And I just let the bottom do its thing. I don't really focus too much on it. Whenever it spins, the the paints kind of drip down. So you see I have all those lines. So I do little streaks, as you can see. If you want to add bigger streaks, you can have bigger popsicle sticks, and then you'll have bigger lines. So however you want it. And then you can make your white lines go like this way on the tumbler, up and down, diagonal, whichever way you want it. Just make this tumbler your own. So now I have my epoxy on my tumbler, and then I'm gonna take my other side of my popsicle stick or my wooden stick, and you see at the bottom here, it's starting to fog up really, really quickly, because like I said, the epoxy is warm right now, so it's moving around. So I'm gonna take my stick and then make little squiggly lines. So I have my wooden stick. I'm not chasing the tumbler. I'm just taking it. I'm starting from here, and I'm making just little squiggly lines. This kind of separates the bottom of the tumbler, so it's not all bunched up. It's not all white. So it still has that design. And if it's running too much, go ahead and make your tumbler go the other way, whichever way you want it to go. So if you have it running, you can go ahead and spin it the other way so it runs the opposite direction. So you're gonna see your tumbler change throughout the first hour of turning. That's fine. Go ahead and allow it to do its thing. If you want to add more of this paint, go ahead and do that, and you can add it within. So if you want more glitter, you're going to add less paint. If you want less glitter and more of that foggy look, you're going to add more paint and epoxy. Whenever I'm creating these Milky Way tumblers, I always like to remind myself that I can always add more paint within the first 20 minutes or so. So if you feel like your tumbler isn't enough, doesn't have enough paint on it, let it spin for about 10-15 minutes or even 5 minutes, and you'll start seeing the lines kind of separate, and the lines will become thicker and thicker, and you'll have the enough paint on. So a lot of times you can see that the lines up on the top of my tumbler, they're getting thicker and thicker. So before, they weren't that thick. So just keep that in mind. Let your tumbler do its thing. Don't add all this paint to it and then overwhelm it with paint, and then you won't see that much glitter. So just let it do its thing, let the time run out. Don't touch your tumbler, do something else, and then come back to it after about 5 to 10 minutes. You'll see how much it's changed within that time frame. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to add this Winter Wonderland. These are kind of pieces of snowflakes. So I wanna just add these around the tumbler, and you can see the sparkle on these. They're kind of like holographic. They're really, really pretty. So I thought they would look nice on this tumbler. They might be a little camouflaged on it, but I think it'll give it a nice little accent. So I'm just gonna play around with it and try it to see how it looks. So I just have some dumped in my hand, and I'm just going to randomly place these around the tumbler. So I'm not gonna do anything special with these. I'm just gonna drop them around the tumbler just to create just a little accent. These are really, really cute. I really like them. And I will have all of my glitter names in my description below, including these. All of the glitters that I am using, like I said earlier, is from Glitter Heart Company. So I'm just gonna drop them randomly. And then I'm gonna try to throw some on the bottom. So just kind of throw it at the bottom. It's kind of fun, but some of it kind of stuck. And you don't have to add this to your tumbler. It's completely up to you. Like I say in most of my videos, make your tumbler your own, make it unique, and I'm sure it'll turn out great. I'm now going to let my tumbler turn on the cup turner for about 6 to 8 hours. After about 6 to 8 hours of it on the cup turner, I'm then going to turn off my cup turner, and then I'm going to allow it to spin for another 10 to 12 hours. So I want a total drying or curing time of at least 24 hours. The reason why I wait at least 24 hours is because my next step is going to be decaling. So whenever I go to place a decal on my tumbler, I want my epoxy to be completely cured, because there's a huge possibility of the transfer tape ripping up not cured epoxy. So I'll see y'all in about 24 hours. Hey everyone, I'm back with my tumbler and it is completely cured. You can see how this turned out. So you see how the glitter peeks through that white. I really like just keeping the white paint on there and not adding the other colors because it gives kind of that snow effect. So you see those little Winter Wonderland glitters are so cute on here. So I love that bit of an accent that it makes them pop a little bit. My next step for this tumbler is going to be sanding it down lightly and then adding the decal. Fortunately, since I've taken the proper steps prior to this step, I don't need to sand it as much, but I'm just going to sand a little bit because I do have a little pieces kind of sticking up. So I'm going to be using my 220 grit sanding block, and I do dry sand. I don't add any water when I sand, and I'm just going to lightly sand it. Now on this part, you can sand it a little bit harder than you did last time because you have that thicker coat of epoxy. But if you did add the Winter Wonderland little glitters on there, just be careful with those because those are still exposed. Those aren't sealed with epoxy yet. So you don't want to sand those away. I'm finished sanding my tumbler, and if you did notice, I didn't have to sand it too much. I just had to get a couple spots on the bottom and then just do a little bit on top. So since I sanded it and I put my fingers and my hands all over it, I'm just going to wipe it down with my 91% alcohol. And then my next step is going to be adding the decal. So whenever you sanded your tumbler, if your tumbler got foggy or a little gray, that's fine. The epoxy, when added, is going to shine it right back up. All right, I'm now going to add my decal. I have my towel down. I like to put a towel down so my tumbler doesn't move around whenever I'm trying to line up my decal. So I'm just gonna find a nice spot on my tumbler, and the decal that I am adding, it's going to be Baby It's Cold Outside. I did design this myself. I believe the font is Kamila, but I will add the exact font in my description below. I do make my designs on Cricut Design Space. And then I added some 4-point stars on there. So what I'm actually gonna do is I have two decals. So I have the white, Baby It's Cold Outside, and then I have the red. So I'm going to lay the white first, and then I'm kind of gonna just overlay it or just kind of shadow it with the red on top to make it really pop. The size of this decal is about 3 inches by 2.8 inches, and they're the exact same size. So I didn't make one bigger or one smaller. I'm just going to overlay them to shadow them. You can see I placed my white decal on the tumbler. You can see it's really cute, but you just can't see it too well. So now I'm gonna take the same piece of transfer tape and then I'm going to add that red decal over it. Okay, so I'm gonna try to show y'all in real time how I place this decal. So what I do is I kind of focus on a couple letters. So I'll just, right now I'm gonna focus on the B. So the B and the baby. So I'm just going to make sure that is kind of shadowed, and I'm not focusing on the others because I don't wanna overthink this. I just wanna make it shadowed, and you can see the B, it has a good shadow. So I just kind of place it to the left. I either do it up, down, left, however I feel like laying it, honestly. And then if one letter, oops, it just pulled. If one letter is shadowed, then the overall concept is the rest is going to shadow. So let me line up that B again because I just lost it because I was trying to make sure you guys can see this in the frame. And then everything else kind of lines up the way it should. And I just place it right over that white decal, and it creates that nice shadow effect, and it really lets those lets that decal really pop. And now I have my decal placed. Now I don't know if you guys can see this, but the apostrophe on it's the red decal, I lost it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to detach this in Cricut Design Space and then just recut this part so I can just have this decal right here. So sometimes that happens. You can cut out the entire design again and just pick out that apostrophe, or you can remove the apostrophe, whichever one you choose to do. So I'll be right back after I do that. To epoxy this tumbler, I will be using about 20 to 25 milliliters of epoxy. So that's about 10 to 12 milliliters of part A and 10 to 12 milliliters of part B. After that, I will then let it turn on the cup turner for about 6 to 8 hours. Turn off the cup turner and then let it air dry or air cure for another 10 to 12 hours. And then I'll clean up my rim and clean the inside, and the tumbler will be ready to go. I do have a help video in my description below on how I clean out my rim of my tumbler and the inside of my tumbler, so go ahead and check that out if you need assistance with that. And this about sums up this video and this tutorial. I hope you did enjoy this video, and I hope I was able to help you create something beautiful for the holidays. If I did, please be sure to give this tumbler video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more tumbler and craft videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.